Well, good evening, everybody. I'd like to offer a warm welcome on behalf of SSGN, the Spirituality and Sustainability Global Network. My name's Jim McClellan, and today our conversations series will be continuing. And I'd like to point out that this series will be also available on YouTube afterwards with a link to the SSGN website. So this series is complementary to our podcast, which you can access on our website, which is called Make It Sacred. So if you have questions, if you could please wait until Dr. Post completes his presentation, or alternatively place them in the chat section, and we will relay them to Dr. Post after he completes his program. So to moderate this program, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Ensign Cowell, a founding member of SSGN, who will introduce our speaker. Ensign, can I turn it over to you?
Okay, Jim. This is a great honor and pleasure for me because Dr. Post, Stephen Post, has been a friend for a long time from Cleveland. He spent 20 years at Cleveland at the medical school, and I got to know him through his activities with the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love and through our church affiliation. And he wrote a book, Why Good Things Happen to Good People. And he's written a number of books, and he is a scholar, public speaker, a professor at the medical school, first at the University of Chicago, then in Cleveland at their medical school, and the university hospitals are big super regional, and now at Stony Brook University in Long Island. He grew up in Long Island. He grew a great affection with Cleveland during his time in Cleveland. And we were lucky to see him last week with the annual meeting of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. Stephen has a doctorate. Well, he's an incredibly diverse person and of scholarship and knowledge and so forth, including marine science. He and fellow friends started a marine science institute that was at one time ranked #1 in the country, and which is now part of Stony Brook. But his main field, his PhD, his doctorate is in religion, ethics, and psychology. And the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, which he founded at the urging and sponsorship and help of Sir John Templeton of Temple and Mutual Funds, is all about the real reality of love as a major force in the universe, which connects directly with spirituality and directly with nature, which is what he's going to speak to us about tonight.
Thank you.
Stephen, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Ensign. And it was very nice to see you last week, for sure. Let me just touch on the title here, Positive Psychology and Health. I'm going to try to explain what that might be. You wonder why it says Miller School of Medicine. That's because I have to go down to Miami in about a month and do a grand rounds or two, and this will be my topic. So this is a book that Sir John Templeton, the investor, wrote. It's called The Essential Worldwide Laws of Life. It's really based in wisdom literature. It's not meant to be scientific. I was honored when Sir John asked me to write a foreword and be able to sign his book in his stead at various institutions around the world. That was always fun. But his laws of life, in many ways, form the whole basis of positive psychology, which is the most highly funded research movement in psychology in the world. Gratitude. The Gratitude Center at UC Davis, run by Bob Emmons, is renowned. Kindness, honesty, service, humility, perseverance, patience, future-mindedness, thrift, forgiveness, the Forgiveness Institute at the University of Virginia. Every one of these became the subject of a major research initiative at a major university, and I had the honor of working with Sir John and helping to fund a number of these things. That's Sir John, myself, Rick Moody, Sir John was a very happy guy. This is one of his quotes. "Who are the happiest people you've ever met? Let us write down the names of 10 persons who continually bubble over with happiness, and we will probably find that most are men and women who radiate love for everyone." Nice metaphor, radiate love for everyone. I knew that Sir John wanted high-level scientists to weigh in on these laws of life. He was no longer content with wisdom literature on its own. So in 1997, at the Philadelphia Marriott Hotel, I helped get Sir John and Martin E.P. Seligman together for dinner, lunch and dinner. And from that, Sir John realized he had his scientist, and Marty Seligman realized that he had his foundation, his funder. Marty had been studying learned helplessness in dogs, which is not quite an inspiring topic. And I think he wanted to go positive. At least that was the basis of our discussion. So that evening, everything moved forward. And with the help of Sir John and the Templeton Foundation, positive psychology was born. Several years later, we had the first positive psychology collegium with George Valiant, Bob Enright, Bob Emmons, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, Tedeschi, Peterson, myself, and a number of others. And we basically began to form a movement. So what is positive psychology? It is the scientific study of the strengths that enable individuals and communities to thrive. The field is founded on the belief that people want to live meaningful and fulfilling lives, to cultivate what is best within themselves, and to enhance their experiences of love, work, and play. That's from the UPenn Positive Psychology Center. That's George Valiant and Lynn Underwood, who was the executive vice president of the Fetzer Institute in Michigan. And she was very interested in the study of spirituality and happiness, but also the love of nature. Wonderful. And from that 2000 meeting, we collectively visualized an alternative to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illnesses that is the textbook for the American Psychiatric Society. You actually need that, of course, because there is illness in the world. But at a certain point, you want to shift and see how will these cultivations of character strengths and the formation of virtue, how will that in fact affect health more positively, and how can it be used in healthcare settings? So these were the major things that we included in that book. We would have a little history of the idea of creativity, for example, then some past science, some thoughts about where the science needed to go, and how this could all contribute to society in the long run. So creativity, perspective, persistence, integrity, kindness, purpose, forgiveness, humility. Sir John was very big on humility. Awe, beauty, self-regulation. That was actually at the University of Miami with Mike McCullough. Gratitude, hope, resilience, happiness. Marty Seligman was writing his book on happiness, and he combined hedonic happiness, which was okay. It's nice to have a good plate of food. Flow, because Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi had written the book Flow about being in those transcendent states of extraordinary creativity, which are so fulfilling. And then good actions, feeling that you've lived a good life over the course of a lifetime. That's Aristotle's idea. So it combines these three great traditions of happiness. Now, what about sustainability and nature and happiness? Well, this is a wonderful book that Harvard put out by one of my friends, Esther Sternberg. Esther calls this book Healing Spaces. She's been on the fast track for now about 10 years, giving plenaries at the Society of American Architecture and Hospital Design and so forth, etc. Her story is interesting. I'll very briefly touch on it. She had an autoimmune problem. She was running the Psychoneuroimmunology Institute at the NIH. It's a mouthful, but it really gets to how emotional states affect the brain and affect physical health. It's basically mind and body. So she could not shake this problem that she had. And a friend of hers offered her a cottage in Greece on the Aegean Sea. So Esther left everything behind. She quit the NIH and she lived in this beautiful environment, and also, of course, had the Mediterranean diet, which was important. And she got better. And she realized, although she'd written the best books in the world about how social stress creates anxiety and loads us up with stress hormones, which are not good for us in many, many different ways. But she also realized that just the visual environment, the architectural environment in which we live, has a lot to do with stress and well-being. And so this became a bestseller, and she has done incredible work. Now, just to bring her ideas home, this is a vision of Hopewell. Hopewell is about an hour and a half due east of Cleveland, Ohio, toward the Pennsylvania border. Clara Rankin, whom I think Ensign knows, purchased 350 acres of beautiful land from the Amish. This is Amish country out there. And she wanted to create an environment where people, especially young people, could heal up from mental illness. And she had been talking about this for a long time. And it was a personal thing because one of her family members, as she's talked about publicly, had been struggling. So this is what Hopewell is. It's allowing people to get back into nature, to have contact with a horse in an equestrian program, do some fishing, enjoy the colors of fall, connect with the earth, with humus. The word humility comes from earth. And you remember how Sam Ganji did so well, despite all of the stresses that he had undergone in the ring quest. And that's because he was a gardener. And at the end of the story, he comes back to the Shire and is able to adjust very well. He marries, he has a couple of little babies around, and he's gardening. And Frodo, of course, is not a gardener, and he can't make that adjustment. So he goes off on a ship with the elves and Gandalf, and we don't exactly know where they went. But there is something about gardening. If you look at Voltaire's Candide, at the end of Candide, after Candide's had all these very elaborate philosophies of, how good things always do happen to good people, maybe. He's kind of calmed down, and he and his family, they're all just gardening, and they're doing well. They're thriving in nature. A little more from Hopewell. Now, at Hopewell, they have small groups, and the small groups have conversations regularly about positive psychological themes. They might spend a week or two on kindness and be doing kind things for one another, and then shift to forgiveness, and then shift to gratitude. And this is tremendously health giving for them. They might also shift to awe and beauty in nature. By the way, this is just a very wonderful psychiatric hospital in Sweden, and you can see how incredibly well designed it is. It utilizes nature as a form of medical intervention, and that's how it really should be used. It's a vitamin pill for the soul. Um, I'm a believer in positive healthcare design. Harry Stack Sullivan was a psychiatrist at the University of Chicago. I didn't know him because he predated me by many, many years. But he had come from Vermont to medical school. And in medical school, he had a schizophrenic break. And he had to go back home to Vermont, where he knew all the voices that he would hear. They were his old friends. His mind, his brain connected with the symbols in the environment, the steeple uh, of the old church and the bells, and well, everything was something. Everything he could connect with beautifully gave him a renewed sense of peace and inner wholeness. And he eventually went back to medical school, mostly healed, and had a very successful career. He became the single most successful and famous psychiatrist for people with bipolar and schizophrenia in American history, building on his own experience. And he had a beautiful definition of love, which was the core of his medical career, when the well being and the security of another is as meaningful or real to you as your own. And sometimes even more so, you love that person. That's what he believed. And so Hopewell is really rooted in Harry Stack Sullivan's ideas. I once gave a plenary address at Hopewell, and I talked about Sullivan, and I was surprised at how familiar some of the people were with him. Um, they use small reflection groups, which are very important. We use them here in our medical school, just regularly bringing together students in groups of 7 or 8, taking them out of the clinical environments and letting them just reflect on the emotional and the personal side of their clinical experiences, some of which are a lot to process. And then, of course, the other thing about Hopewell is it has what um, Thomas uh, Scattergood, who was a Philadelphia Quaker. It's a nice name for a Quaker, Thomas Scattergood. He actually founded the American Psychiatric Association in about 1879 or say 1880. And he believed in moral treatment. So he believed that you wanted to have people in nature, but positively engaged socially. Somebody's baling the hay. Somebody should be taking care of the horses. Someone should be bringing in the eggs from the chicken coop. That connectedness with nature is extraordinarily powerful in the perspective of the moral treatment movement, which is where American psychiatry began. I'll say a little more about that. That's where it began. It began in nature. And then, of course, creativity. They do a lot of creative work with pottery and so forth, and they sell it. They have a store on the corner of one of those. I think it's Route 306 or something. And you can pop by there and you can buy some beautiful things. And of course, we also have taken nature and positive psychology into the into the penal system. This is the Grafton Correctional Institution, where I used to spend an afternoon a week. It's out near Oberlin, Ohio. And all these lifers, these are Cleveland's most challenging criminals with very difficult records. And they probably will never get out of prison. But you see, they reconnect with nature and it brings life to them again. And they actually produce foodstuffs for the other prisons across the state of Ohio. And this has captured national attention. They also do hospice work. So it was beautiful to bring them into the connection of giving, kindness, and nature. That's the secret equation. And it's Olmsted believed that to his core. I'm not going to go into this in depth. I could, but I won't, nevertheless, just to say that in all these areas of medical care, we use this formula, even with regard to pain clinics. People encourage individuals, so long as they're able to go out and to help other individuals. It gets their mind off their pain, and especially to do that in a naturalistic setting. And there are some interesting studies about how successful this can be. When people, you wonder, get out of after 6 months out of Homewood, where do they go? Hopewell, where do they go? Well, they might go into inner city Cleveland because there's a large inner city gardening program that Jan Thrope runs. She was my neighbor in Shaker Heights for many, many years. In fact, I saw her last week when I was in town. And they also they often go to Detroit. Detroit, if you look at the map, about 20% of Detroit now is beautiful farmland. It's amazing, they're putting together great architecture. The place is really coming back, and 20% of it is farmland, and they've got everybody, all these young people who are otherwise getting in trouble. They're finding meaning and purpose in creating a beautiful agrarian environment. This is a picture of Homestead. She died in 1903. It's quite an amazing picture. That's McLean Hospital before it was pared down. It's not as big as that now, but you can see the sweeping hills, and it's tremendously effective. This is the Institute for Living in Hartford, Connecticut, where I've spent some time as a visiting faculty member. This was the original Connecticut asylum, and it was also designed, all these were designed by Olmsted himself. He designed the 6 sister asylums on the East Coast, the Philadelphia Asylum, the Connecticut Asylum, all of these. And he just had this wonderful passion about it because he knew that people's mental health depended on having some proximity, some connectivity with the natural environment and its beauty and its energy. This is the Friends Hospital in Philadelphia, again, another Olmsted creation. And there's a picture of Central Park. As I said earlier, he also did Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And incidentally, when he passed away, and he was at that time residing in McLean as a resident / patient, you have to think about it. This was a man who he knew that his own health and well-being depended on connection with nature. And he wanted to create that beauty and that internal calm for everyone else in the world. That was his mission. And so he gave to countless millions a sense that they could be healthy when they cherish the gift of nature. That was Olmsted's theology. Very important stuff. And I will say that, when people walk across Central Park in New York, as they've been doing for countless years, I don't think too many of them realize that they have inherited the legacy, sometimes the very painful legacy, of a man who struggled with his own depression and his own schizoaffective disorders, and who unlocked the key of nature as the secret to mental health, at least in his case. And now our literature is full of significant studies about this. It's not formal nosology, it's not formal definition of mental illness, but we now have a lot of people talking about nature deficit disorders. Okay, when you're just raising your kids on these contraptions and they don't even look out the window when you're driving on Route 80 and seeing the beautiful fields of Pennsylvania, that's a problem. So I've mentioned, the importance of connection with nature, and within that natural setting, helping others. So when I came here to Stony Brook, I got an email from United Healthcare, and they wanted to know. I'd written a book called "Why Good Things Happen to Good People." They wanted to know, hey, are you pulling our legs? Is this folly, or is there something to it? So we did a survey, a survey of American adults. This was in 2010, looking back over 2009, and asking people, again, adults, from coast to coast, randomly selected, did you volunteer last year? And 41% of them had volunteered, on average, just on average, about 100 hours a year. And if you break that down, maybe it's a couple of hours a week. It's not much more than that. But 89% agreed that volunteering improved my sense of well-being. Many of them were volunteering in natural settings, by the way. 73% lowered my stress levels. 92% enriched my sense of purpose in life, made me physically healthier, improved my emotional health, helps with recovery from loss and disappointment, improved sleeping, friendships, reduced anxiety and helplessness. So that's pretty powerful. Very, very powerful. In fact, that's literally a one-a-day vitamin pill for the soul. And if you could sell that at some pharmacy, you'd probably be a billionaire overnight. It's a great thing to invest in. Positive psychology also talks about the power of compassionate care, not just for others, but for you. And compassion, as it's defined in positive psychology, is an awareness of the suffering of others. So what is suffering? How is someone suffering with one condition vis-a-vis another? Having an empathic concern, meaning being emotionally connected with that other individual. And then you get into compassion, a wish to see the relief of that suffering. And if you're able to actually make a difference to alleviate that suffering. So the positive psychological definition of compassion is the feeling that arises in witnessing another's suffering and that motivates a subsequent desire to help, whereas empathy is the vicarious experience of another's emotions. Definitions will differ, and I'm sure will differ in this group. A couple comments. Compassionate care helps a lot with adherence to treatment. It helps a lot with adherence to challenging long-term treatments, especially under conditions of chronic illness. So a couple of other images here, and I'm going to wrap this up pretty soon and just go to a conversation. This is Norman Rockwell. I actually met Norman Rockwell. He came up from Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where he spent most of his later life, to St. Paul's School in New Hampshire, where I was a student. And he came up there. I think I was about 14 years old. And he gave a talk on this picture that he had painted. And it was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. And it's called The Golden Rule. It's very iconic. There's a mosaic version of it in the United Nations main assembly building. And he talked about this at very deep levels with all of us kids just gathered around. And he said, how do these people look to you? He was into art and observation. What about their facial expression? There were a lot of differing opinions, but I think the thing that went out was, well, they looked serene. They weren't glib, but they weren't upset or angry. They looked fairly serene. You can see on the lower left, right there, that's Ruby Bridges, who really, in a lot of ways, founded the civil rights movement down there in New Orleans, having to be escorted by the police into that school. She broke the color barrier in a public school in the South. And, she's got books under her hands, you can see. And she's still around. She's still giving talks and has had a great life. But that's Ruby Bridges. He was a tremendous, Rockwell was a tremendous social activist. And as Martin Luther King Jr. said, you can do more to change society through visual arts than through any other medium. And I think that's largely the case. Now, we can discuss that, but you see these got people from every possible complexion, color, age, gender, uh, and they're all focusing on the great universal positive truth of morality and spirituality. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He very specifically that day in St. Paul's, he said, this is idealism. This is not minimalism. Minimalism is do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. That means that you can go home after a long day, and if you haven't elbowed some innocent person in the ribs, you can feel pretty happy about your life and you've been good. But actually, that doesn't take much. Hopefully, you're using your moral imaginations uh, to ask yourself, how can I contribute meaningfully using my gifts to the lives of others? And that, by the way, is what both Picasso and Shakespeare, almost to the word verbatim, said is the purpose of a human life. And then he did something interesting. He asked us, so do you see the circle? I didn't see it. Maybe somebody else did, but he said, look at the white in the middle. So go from the toddler's shirt, go down here to this woman with her robe, and then the rabbi's beard and so forth. And he said, that's a circle of energy, the energy of love. And he said, I'm an Episcopalian. I'm not a devout believer. I sometimes go to church. But he said, I do think there's an energy in the universe that all meaningful spirituality has in common at its root. And that is this energy of kindness and love. And he said, this is an interesting comment. He said, it's like surfing. You have to paddle really hard to catch the wave. But once you catch the wave, it carries you, and all you have to do is balance. And so the life of love, of loving your neighbor, is like surfing in a way. Purpose is a feature of positive psychology. Older adults rating high quartile in purpose of life had a 30% lower rate of cognitive decline than the lower quartile. By the way, none of these anti-dementia drugs work. I know them all. I've been involved in many of the studies, and I won't name them per se, but they're basically not focusing on anything that's meaningful. So most of the good science is saying now that we just don't know what dementia is. And I think that's true. So we don't know what to aim at. But at any rate, it seems as though over the course of a lifetime, having a high degree of purpose, and oftentimes these purposes are described as somewhat altruistic or loving and kind, that can be very beneficial. Medical school students who were reported as having higher levels of empathy during medical school had lower risks of reported symptoms of burnout during their residency. The great Norman Cousins, The Anatomy of an Illness, described his healing from an autoimmune disease, spondylitis. And he said, if negative emotions can produce chemical changes in the body, why not positive ones? It is possible that love, hope, faith, laughter, confidence, and the will to live have therapeutic value. Do chemical changes occur only on the downside? Of course, he went off to found the Norman Cousins Institute of Positive Psychology at USC, and it's still going strong to this day, and it's really a great tradition. Jerome Groopman, the oncologist from Harvard, hope can make a physiological difference within limits. It's an oncologist, so at some point, many people do, in fact, just succumb to the power of cancer, but within limits, it can be protective. This is something I like from Redford and Virginia Williams. Redford Williams was the chair of cardiology at Duke, And what he did was he went back, this is in the 1990s, to an instrument that was formulated before World War II, but it's still very much used, the Minnesota Multi-Personality Inventory. I actually took it once upon a time. And there are probably 300 questions on it, quick questions, yes or no answers for the most part. And he divided them into the high quartile and the low quartiles. He tried to define those quartiles. And what he discovered is that the ones who took this test in 1950, when they were 25 years of age, and then you looked at where they were at age 75, I'm sorry, at age 50 in 1975, so 25 years later, 20% of the high hostiles um, were dead by age 50. 2% of the low hostiles were dead by age 50. What were they dying of? Mainly cardiac illnesses. But we also know that protracted stress affects not just the vascular system, but also it slows wound healing by about 15 to 20%, many say, and also causes hippocampal atrophy. So it's one of the undisputed 7 pathways into dementia, because it's the hippocampus that lays down new memories. And if you run into anybody with, say, Alzheimer's dementia, it's typically the case. They can still remember things from back in their lives, but they can't go shopping because they can't remember what they're going shopping for. So I just wanted to bring these things to your attention. There's a lot of positive neuroscience going on, a lot of positive psychology in practice. Humility is one of the great virtues of positive psychology. And, you know, I love Asian artwork of nature. If you go to that Cleveland Museum of Art, Ensign, you know, you'll see those beautiful panoramas. And, you know, the waterfall is the whole wall. And then somewhere in a little corner, you see, you know, a little guy with a fishing pole, you know, and it's a certain attitude about where we as human beings fit in the natural order. And then you go to the next room on the next floor, the Renaissance, right? And you've got some big human being, half naked, sort of sprawled out over a couch, and that's it. Okay. So it's incredibly different culturally. My wife, Mitsuko, was a member of the Japanese National Folk Ballet for many years. In fact, when I met her, that's where she was working. And, you know, they don't jump high. They stay close to the ground, and they do all kinds of beautiful things. But what a difference with the Western ballerina, who's just up in the air all the time. Same idea. You don't want to get too high above the ground, too high above humility, too high above the earth. From arrogance to humility, I'm going to wind down now. You can just take a look at that. Listens to understand, doesn't listen, interrupts, gives space, wants to be right, has an open mind, pushes the point through, allows ideas to emerge, and it goes on. And that's so relevant, because the problem is that people who are not able to make room for others take up all the room in themselves, and so there's no space for anyone else. And I like this. This is a statement from Iran. They weave an imperfection in every Persian rug because God alone is perfect. How can we not be humble? And then wrongly attributed to C.S. Lewis, maybe rightly, but most people think wrongly. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And in terms of our relationship with nature, I think that holds true. We don't need to think less of ourselves as human beings, but we should think a little, we should be thinking of ourselves less, and probably of other species and of nature more. How little we know, how eager to learn, Sir John Templeton. This is a Long Island blowfish. When you lack humility, you know, you just puff yourself up. But humility, by its true definition, is neither self-inflating or self-deflating. I mean, there is this sense in which a lot of our abuse of nature comes from this ethos of self-inflation. We're human beings. We're the epitome of the universe. Well, in some respects, that may be true, but we also take it much too far, um, and uh, and so without risking self-deflation, we can avoid blowing up like a blowfish. By the way, this picture in the background is the Great South Bay. That's the Robert Moses Causeway. And my father, who was a very environmentally conscious man, especially for his generation, he founded the Great South Bay Preservation Society because there was a period where you couldn't even sail in the Great South Bay because the seaweed was so thick. If you had a centerboard or a dagger board, you couldn't go more than an inch. You couldn't even run an engine in the Great South Bay because the stuff was so bad. And so that's when my dad, who had gone to college with Robert Moses, he brought Robert Moses to the house and about 20 of his other friends. He'd been the Commodore of the cruising club of the Great South Bay, and they organized this incredible entity. And within 10 years, they had built a sewage system on the South Shore of Long Island. One of the greatest accomplishments that you could ever imagine for the environment. Lots of different kinds of humility. There's intellectual humility. Barbara McClintock got the Nobel Prize. She was in Huntington, New York, just a few miles down the road. And then her laboratory was at Cold Spring Harbor, which is just another couple of miles down the road. And she would get up every morning. Before she ate, she would go out into nature. She would walk down a path by the Long Island Sound, and then she would meditate in nature. Isn't it funny how when you go to most meditational centers, you'll find, a little flowing water over a rock and maybe some wind chimes. You might go to a church and you'll see a little garden with St. Francis of Assisi, like St. Paul's has in Cleveland Heights. So she understood that. And then she would go into her laboratory and, she'd gone to Cornell and she studied plant biology, but she didn't buy into a lot of the templates, the theories that were floating around about cell division. She just wanted to observe it very carefully. And that's the women's epistemology, it would be called. And she just looked very carefully at what she saw. And she actually figured out cell division and got the Nobel Prize for it. Not because she had a lot of theories and templates to lay onto nature, but because she really keenly observed nature. So that's intellectual humility. Jimmy Carter, in her personal humility, I won't go into stories about Jimmy Carter. Cicely Saunders, the founder of the hospice movement, incredible spiritual humility. Even the year before she died, she knew she was dying. She would go into St. Christopher's Hospice and spend an hour changing bedpans. And then she'd sit on the end of the bed and she would just talk with people about things in their lives that were most meaningful. Cultural humility, we have to have that in these hospitals because everybody comes from a different part of the world. And then now people do wonderful studies on humility, which I'm not going to go into here. But I just want to say that nature is a big part of positive psychology. And these days, there's much more research being done on positive psychology than on disease-based psychology because people think it's more promising. And I certainly do. There's more being done on post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress. I co-chaired a UN panel on resiliency and post-traumatic growth that looked at all kinds of indigenous traditions. So that's the kind of thing we need to be focusing on. And nature, the love of nature, cherishing nature. I have a little mantra that's the basis of my next book. May you give and glow, because I know about how kind giving generates a kind of internal biological effervescence. May you heal with kindness. Anybody can heal if they're kind. May you follow your callings. May you know inner peace. May you cherish the gift of nature. That's the next one. And there's a great chapter on that I'm still working on, but it's going to come, it's going to get there. And it interweaves with all these other lines from the mantra. And then, of course, may you dignify the spirit of freedom. So I feel very honored in my life to have started the second marine science program in the United States, past Scripps. And I'm very honored to have been able to do a lot of interesting work in positive psychology, and to work in medical centers, even though I guess technically speaking, I'm a bit of a philosopher theologian, but I run programs and they win national awards left and right because we don't just focus on quandary ethics, but we focus on virtues. And we don't just focus on virtues philosophically, but we focus on virtues as we understand them now in terms of how they contribute to health, security, and well-being. Okay, Ensign, that's it from me.
Well, we can open up now, and Ensign, do you want to start with a question, or are we?
I'm going to throw out a question. Stephen, this has been very, very illuminating, very inspiring, and very thorough for a lot of things that will help us think to bring more people into the fold of caring about nature, and especially from the spiritual, philosophical, theological call of what I call the imperative for living in harmony with nature. And I guess my question to you would be, how do you have ideas about how we can help more people to be more aware and more sensitive? I always think of the Japanese forest bathing, how they understand it,
Yeah.
What ideas come to mind for you for helping more people to be more aware and caring about nature, because we live more and more urbanized and in concrete environments and on screen. They now call them screenagers rather than teenagers,
Yeah. Well, I hired the gal, she's a Stanford trained MD, who did the movie Screenagers, which became a national sensation. She was our first documentary physician here at Stony Brook. She's now at the University of Washington in Seattle. But I think the more we learn about the implications of nature deficit disorder, again, that's not formal psychiatric nosology, but I spend a decent amount of time hanging around psychiatric emergency units, especially on the weekends at night, because I'm curious about where the society is at, and that's an important element of our society, and we have to own it, like we have to own these young adolescent males who go into shopping centers and shoot people up. I mean, that's the fruit of our alienated culture. And so I like to spend time in those environments. And I got to tell you that even though people don't talk a lot about nature deficit disorder, you won't read it on the charts, but I think a lot of people feel that it's a problem. And so when you think about Olmsted is my hero in a lot of ways. Olmsted felt that if you could get those people into Central Park, they would be better off for it. So it's a long tradition, and we just need to emphasize it. It's there. It's not like something new has to be discovered, or people have to be frightened by some empirical claim about, nature imploding or whatever. But we need to work very, very hard at underscoring the link between security, happiness, spirituality, and cherishing nature. I like to say cherishing nature more than the love of nature, but it's also the case, I I sometimes get criticized. Mathieu Ricard, the French Buddhist geneticist, wrote a book called Altruism, and he talked about our institute. Ensign is a member of the board of the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, and he talked about me, and he said, "Well, this, the Western philosopher of agape love, Stephen Post, unfortunately doesn't include nature." And when I read that, there's a whole page about it. I realized he's absolutely correct. I mean, now that was 2000 in Glidden House at University Circle in Cleveland when we first got together. But I realized that he was right. And that's one of the reasons why I was attracted to bringing Ensign on the board, because I felt that we needed to love nature. And you can't really separate the love of a supreme being, however you define it, the love of neighbor and the love of nature. The three of them go together. And in some ways, we have a lot to learn from the Eastern traditions.
I have a question. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Feel it.
I worked in labor and delivery at McDonald House 50 years ago when they were separating babies from their mothers, going and weighing them, blah, blah, blah. I'm a prenatal science educator, and I know that the importance of the breast crawl and the microbiome transfer by skin to skin when you put that baby right to the mother, skin to skin after birth. Well, I'm wondering if we couldn't change, make a more. Arnie Ness said the ecological self is in and of nature from the very beginning, and that is in the mother's. That's when the egg and sperm come together. That's when the conception happens. So the mother is the prenate's matrix.
Yes.
Why aren't we working more on conscious conception or supporting a mother in the way that she needs to be supported with partner, as a family unit, as nature-based?
Yeah.
We could change people's relationship to nature if they had a healthier relationship with their primary nature, which is mother-child.
Yeah, I agree completely. And if they weren't, well, the behaviorists, unfortunately, Skinner said, quote, "The most dangerous force in the universe is mother love." And
oh my gosh.
And when I was born, which is a while ago, they kept the babies as far away from breasts as they possibly could. And that. You probably knew John Kennel, right?
Yep, I was there when they did the bonding attachment studies.
Yeah, so John and I actually did a small group together in the medical school on these longitudinal annual courses. And I love John. He was the closest I ever came to Mr. Rogers as a doctor. And what he figured out, what had happened was that the head of the American Psychological Association in 1950 figured out that attachment theory mattered, which is what you're talking about, that somehow or another, when you took those monkeys, I mean, some monkeys would, in cage A, would just get milk from a bottle, but
on
nothing to cuddle
on
with.
a wire. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then another group would get the milk, but then there was a trap door that they could go through and they could cuddle.
Yeah.
And the ones who could cuddle flourished, and the ones who couldn't failed to thrive and died.
Yeah. But I'm talking about maternal fetal bonding.
Oh yeah.
That we should be starting from the very beginning. There's sentience there, there's consciousness there, and there's relationship from the very beginning.
Totally. And so I our institute funded all the major work on how to raise a caring child, how to raise kind kids, that book and all those kinds of things. And it all has to start prenatally.
Yeah.
And
preconception.
Preconception.
Actually, preconception.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, the problem we have to some degree is that people bring children into the world, but for what purpose? Do they bring them into the world to be kind children, to be kind and generative, or not? And we have so much violence, so much brutality. We just need to learn to do that.
Yeah.
And
Fetal origins. There's studies on fetal origins of violence.
oh yes, oh yeah,
it's all there. It's all there. And then artificial ways of conceiving. You know, what does that effect does it have on an embryo that's frozen? And prenatal science is saying there's memory there, and we have to address those ways of coming into relationship if you're in a freezer.
But you're right. You know, this is a part of what it means to take the discussion of nature seriously. It's everything.
That's right.
We're all
That's
thinking
right.
up here.
That's right.
But that's a part of it. And John Kennel was wonderful. And I'll tell you, you know, I was so sad when he passed away. Fred Robbins thought he was like a miracle on wheels, practically.
Yeah.
And so he wrote that book with Klaus, Kennel and Klaus.
Yeah.
That changed the whole practice of what happens, for example, in the NICU, where the mothers were not even allowed within a country mile of the NICU itself because they were pollutants. With John Kennel's influence, they started. This is worth Avery. What was his name? Who ran the neonatology unit? But anyway, they started to bring the mothers in, and just to rock the babies, even though the babies couldn't hardly be visible through all the paraphernalia, as you know. You know, but they would rock.
Well, kangaroo care. Susan Luddington did kangaroo care for a long, long time, and I took a course on it to be certified in it, a kangaroo birth care. And she said that if you have twins and both are nursing, one has a fever, the breast milk that's going to the baby with the fever will be a different temperature than the one going to the other one. It regulates the heartbeat and the brain waves and the oxygenation levels. I mean, they're doing this, but I think they could even do more.
They could do more. I think it's some very important stuff, and I'm grateful.
Other questions? Other questions?
Yeah,
this is
thank
great.
you.
Yes, if you have a question, please raise your hand. Song Lee. Yes.
You're muted, Song Lee.
Yeah.
Still muted, still muted.
Alicia or Natasha, if you could unmute Song Lee.
And to unmute myself. Yeah. The question is that it seems good is good for people themselves. And good also make Earth and other people good. But why, you know, bring this concept of good to people is so difficult. And doing negative seems, is that because of nature of humans? Why? You know, just like, I don't know whether I'm clear or not, just to say, you know, people should be clever enough and they see good, being good, will bring good to yourself. Why that could not become an incentive for people to become good.
Might as well.
However, okay, just like see, is that we are not intelligent enough, or, you know, not being good is closer to humans' nature. That's just like a question.
Well, you know, Sir John Templeton and I, one of the reasons we got along so well together was because we believed it's good to be good. And he approved a motto for the Institute: in the giving of self lies the unsought discovery of a deeper self. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be that paradoxical or unsought. The bottom line is that we can benefit from contributing to the lives of others and finding our purposes, our callings, our summons in the universe, if you want to speak of it in those terms. And so I think we got this all wrong. This myth, this terrible myth, and it's very, very destructive. We wrote a paper in a psychology journal about widows and widowers who had been married for a long time and happily, and now their spouse has gone, is deceased. And we wanted to know how kindness and giving contributed, if they did, to negotiating bereavement and grief. And it turned out there was quite a significant difference. People could define or be described by others as contributing to the lives and their environment through whatever mediating structures and so forth. They were doing better. So the New York Society of Widows and Widowers, there is such a thing. They call me on my phone here and they say, would you come in? And we have an annual meeting in New York. This is like 15 years ago. And would you talk about this? And I said, okay. So I went in and I talked. There was a big group of people in a hotel, 500 or 600 folks. And I gave the science. That's the rational side of it. I mean, how you can even biomarkers and so forth, and flourishing and all kinds of things. And then at the end, I said, are there any questions? And there was a guy in the back of the room, and he was frantically waving his hands. And he said, I don't do nothing for nothing. That said it all. I knew I wasn't in Cleveland. No, I'm kidding. But I don't do nothing for nothing. And people think somehow that if they just engage themselves in the flow of generosity, like the Dalai Lama would recommend, that somehow they're not in a transactional modality and they're not getting something back. Well, they are getting something back. What they're getting back is their own well-being, their own happiness, their own meaning in life. And so that's the myth that's so destructive. And you still, you still get an awful lot of people. I mean, the Harvard study, the Harvard School of Education did the study on kindness. And it turns out that parents in America want their kids to be kind. So they're okay with, raising kind kids thinking, until the kids get into their teen years and it gets competitive. And then they have to try to get them into the better schools or whatever. And then they don't care so much about kindness anymore. Now that may be transitory, but that's what the research has been showing. And so parents can work a lot harder at encouraging kindness, being role models for kindness. And that's the way we need to go. And we can do it. It's not that difficult, actually. It's a lot nicer as a parent having kind kids than having kids who are unkind, because the unkind kids will not succeed in life. They won't stick with the good jobs. They won't be happy. They could wind up under a bridge on Route 80. So who knows?
So that means the system is wrong somehow.
The system is wrong somehow. It's good to be good. That's what we should be focusing on. And Picasso and Shakespeare, I think, had it right.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Please let us know if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please.
Stephen, I just want to say, I think this has been very interesting, very encouraging, and has given us some great ideas of how to help out programmatically to get more people in touch with nature and caring about nature, and the pragmatic as well as the spiritual values to that. So thank you very much for your presentation tonight and time with us.
Well, thanks for tolerating me. And Joe, it's nice to see you.
Yeah, well, I'd also like to thank Stephen and for sharing your insights, and we hope we can have the honor of having you come back on a future conversation where
Okay.
we can maybe explore other related subjects.
Well,
And,
keep me on your email list and I'll try to chime in.
okay. And also, I'd like to express gratitude to Kalisha and Natasha for facilitating our program so well this evening. And we look forward to sharing this program with you on YouTube, which will take a couple of weeks, but we'll send a link to the recording as well. So look forward to our continuing dialogue together on conversations, and hopefully we'll be sending out another conversations invitation for September. So thank you everyone for spending time with us this evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
The pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Namaste.
Namaste.